1. The Whispering Pines. A group of friends ventured into the woods for a weekend camping trip, eager to escape the pressures of everyday life. The trees around them were dense and ancient, their twisted branches intertwining to block out much of the sunlight. As night fell, they gathered around the campfire, telling stories when they began hearing faint whispers from the trees. At first, they dismissed it as the wind, but the whispers grew louder. It wasn't wind, it was voices. They attempted to leave, but found the path had vanished, and the woods had become an unfamiliar labyrinth. They started seeing shadowy figures lurking in the trees, moving just out of sight. In their frantic attempts to escape, one of them was pulled into the darkness by an unseen force. The remaining friends searched for him, but there was no trace. As dawn broke, the whispers stopped. When they were finally rescued, they returned to the same spot a few years later. The trees had been cut down, but one remained, shaped like a twisted human figure. 2. The black oak legend had it that the black oak at the heart of the forest was cursed. People who ventured near it disappeared without a trace, and the locals avoided the area entirely. One young man, eager to disprove the stories, set out to investigate. Armed with only a camera and a journal, he camped near the tree. At first, nothing happened, but on the second night, he began to feel a presence. He noticed strange carvings on the tree's bark, symbols he had never seen before. As he touched them, the forest seemed to grow still, as though holding its breath. That's when he heard a low growl. He turned around, but there was nothing there. The growl grew louder, closer, until a figure stepped from the shadows. An emaciated skeletal creature with hollow eyes, half human, half animal. He ran, but the creature followed, its footsteps echoing in his mind long after he escaped the woods. The man was found days later, muttering about the black oak and the thing that had taken its soul. No one ever dared go near that tree again. 3. The Hollow. A family moved into an isolated cabin in the woods, hoping to enjoy a peaceful life away from the city. They were warned by locals about the eerie place, an area known simply as the Hollow. The family laughed it off, dismissing it as superstition. One evening, while walking through the woods, they found a strange pit at the base of a large hill. It seemed to stretch far deeper than any natural hole should. A faint humming emanated from within. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to descend into the pit. As they did, they noticed a trail of old worn shoes scattered about, along with torn clothing and rusted tools. The deeper they went, the louder the humming grew. It became a song, a chorus of many voices. Suddenly, the pit closed in, and they realized they were no longer alone. Shadows twisted around them, and the ground seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. In the frenzy of terror, the family tried to climb out, but they found that no matter how high they climbed, they were always pulled back down. The humming grew louder, and they became part of the chorus. The shadows of Lost Lake. The area around Lost Lake had always been considered dangerous, its waters dark and still, but a group of adventurous hikers decided to spend a weekend camping near the lake. As dusk fell, they noticed the air growing heavy and cold. One by one, they began seeing figures, humanoid shapes just beyond the tree line, watching them silently. As night deepened, the shapes grew bolder, creeping closer to their camp. One of the hikers, feeling brave, ventured toward them but was swallowed by the darkness. The others, panicked, searched frantically but found nothing but a ripple on the water. The lake, once calm, was now rippling violently, as though something was beneath it. The remaining hikers tried to leave, but the path out seemed to change every time they turned around. The lake's surface shimmered with strange, shifting images, faces twisted in agony. It wasn't until dawn that they found their way back to the main trail, but they were forever haunted by the things they saw in the shadows of Lost Lake. 5. The Return of the Wood Witch. Centuries ago, a woman was executed for practicing witchcraft in a remote village near a dense forest. Before her death, she cursed the land, vowing to return when the woods were most vulnerable. Years passed, and the legend faded into obscurity. A pair of hikers, drawn by the beauty and solitude of the forest, stumbled upon an ancient stone circle hidden deep within the trees. The air was thick, almost as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As they set up camp near the stones, the wind began to pick up, and strange symbols appeared on the ground. That night, they heard the cries of a woman, soft and mournful, drifting through the trees. When they followed the sound, they found an old woman in the center of the stone circle. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and she beckoned them closer. The hikers tried to run, but the woods seemed to twist around them. No matter where they turned, the woman was always a few steps ahead. They were trapped in a maze of trees that had no beginning and no end, with the witch's laughter echoing through the night. Neither of them was ever seen again. 6. The unseen footsteps. A young couple decided to take a romantic hike through the woods. They had heard rumors of strange happenings in the area, but dismissed them as local superstition. However, as the couple ventured deeper, they began to notice something unsettling, an unexplainable presence behind them, following their every move. At first, they thought it was an animal, but the sound of footsteps didn't match anything in the forest. The footsteps were too deliberate, too rhythmic. Eventually, the woman began to feel a cold breath on the back of her neck, even though no one was there. Desperate to escape, they turned back toward the trail, but it was as if the woods had shifted. The path had disappeared, replaced by dense underbrush and trees that seemed to close in on them. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and soon they were running in panic. But the more they ran, the further the trail seemed to stretch. By the time they finally reached the edge of the woods, the footsteps stopped. They turned around, and the forest was silent once more. But when they reached their car, they saw something terrifying. There, in the dirt beside their vehicle, were 2 sets of footprints, one of which they knew wasn't theirs. 7. The old cabin. A man decided to stay in an abandoned cabin deep in the woods for a week of solitude and reflection. The cabin, worn down and isolated, seemed like the perfect place to get away from it all. But strange things began to happen on the first night. He heard footsteps in the attic above, though he was sure no one was there. He explored the attic but found nothing but old furniture and dust. Still, every night the footsteps returned, growing heavier and more erratic. The man's sleep began to suffer, and his sanity started to fray. He spent hours researching the cabin's history and discovered that it had once belonged to a family that had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Rumor had it that the family had vanished because they had angered something in the woods. Desperate to leave, the man tried to gather his things, but the door wouldn't open. The windows were sealed shut, and the entire cabin seemed to groan with life. The footsteps returned, louder now, as if the family's spirits were trying to warn him. Finally, when the man could no longer bear it, he screamed for help. The next morning, searchers found the cabin empty. There were no signs of struggle, no trace of the man who had been there, only his journal with frantic entries about the footsteps, the warnings, and the unseen forces of the woods. It remains unclear what happened to him, only that the cabin was still waiting for the next curious soul.